Hi, everybody, and welcome to our live show. We're going to be just kind of here in conversation. So, my name is Mareas. You are here on my channel, and I'm here with Denise. And we're going to be talking all things books. We're going to be talking about her journey to publishing, other media, inspiration. And of course, feel free to jump into the comments if you have other questions or like follow up questions. So, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Hello, everybody. Hello. I recognize people from the Bindery and from the Discord. So hello, thank you. And now I will turn it over to Denise to introduce herself. Give us the the elevator pitch to who Denise is.
Who I am. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining whoever's out there. It's exciting to be here and be part of the Bindery and getting this book published with Maddie. It's just wonderful. I feel like the introducing myself is probably the most challenging thing that I'm going to try to do today because I love talking about the book and books, but I'm like, how do you summarize a person? But I guess I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and this is where I live currently. But there was 16 years in between where I went off to college and then work in upstate New York and in DC for climate change activism type things. Moved back here with my husband just in February. We moved with our two big orange cats. They're named Monday and Lasagna. They're the preeminent orange cats, and we call them Mondo and Lazy for short.
That's cute. Amazing. So let's just kind of dive right into this. I know that throughout this conversation, we'll talk more about specifically the unmapping and, Mareas and like the publishing journey. But I kind of want to start before all of that into just questions of like you as a reader and you as a writer. So have you always been a reader like across your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with some ebbs and flows, I think, but definitely when I was young, I loved reading. Whenever we went on vacation, I always brought, too many books so I could read them. I loved the Mildred Taylor series is what comes to mind of The Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, just kind of amazing, very elegant stories for a young adult audience on, American South and racism and things like that. I was also a big Harry Potter girl. I just read every single book so many different times. Like every time a new book came out, I would reread the whole series until I basically had them memorized. In high school, my reading probably died down a little bit because I was just, being in high school. But in college, I really credit Jonathan Franzen's book Freedom for getting me back into reading. And I know Jonathan Franzen gets some hate. He's a little controversial. But I'm a big Franzen stan. I really love his fiction writing, at least. I'm trying to read all of his novels. So I'm on Strong Motion, which is his second novel and widely regarded as his worst. But it's really fun and funny and weird. And yeah, I don't need to talk too much about Franzen, but I love reading.
Amazing. And then so from okay, what are some of your favorite books?
This is also a hard question. I feel like you're asking such simple questions. And I'm like, they're so hard. But it's just really hard to pick one that I really love more than all. But I think out of the recent books that I've read that I really love, Morning Star by Karl Ove Knausgaard comes to mind. I was just so taken by his writing style. And he wrote this very long My Struggle series, a 6-book series about basically the minutia of his life. And I didn't really feel like reading that, but The Morning Star is a novel about this new star that mysteriously appears in the sky. And there's a lot of weird kind of cult murder things sort of sprinkled around the edges, but it is also about a bunch of characters struggling with the minutia of their lives. By the way, there's this weird star, there's this weird murder. But anyways, I gotta go to the grocery store and get some flowers for this birthday party while the baby is crying. It's really great. I also I keep talking about Ted Chiang's story collection, Exhalation. It's his second collection. He wrote the Story of Your Life, which got turned into the movie Arrival, or adapted. There are some differences, but his second collection is just incredible. I'm always like referencing it. He's just very, writes about science in very exciting ways, and like puts them in stories that have real heart and really make them more about like humanity. The novella in particular, the anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, I think it's called, is just my favorite story on the multiverse that I could ever conceptualize. It's just so good.
Yeah, there's so many, like, I'm trying not to jump ahead too much because we're going to talk about your work, but there's so many things that like you're saying in terms of like stories that you've loved that I'm like, oh, I see that also like pulling through in the unmapping. So that's really, really fun. And I guess my next question is like, are there things, have you ever heard of this term that something is an auto buy? Like, it's like, it just is whatever the book is. If you hear these buzzwords, like you're like, oh, that's for me. So are there any things like that are like, if you see that on the back of the book, like for me, something found family, I'm like, yeah, like I will buy that. But are there any buzzwords like that you're like, oh, if I see this, I'm intrigued?
I have to say, I'm definitely very interested in the cli-fi climate fiction genre. And it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to like the book, but I've cared about climate change since I was really young. And climate change sort of has a role in everything that I write. And I'm really excited to see that so many other people are starting to write about climate fiction in certain ways. Sometimes, the book itself will actually have absolutely nothing to do with climate change. And it was just like, this was just put as a buzzword on the cover to like get me to buy it. But
it worked.
It worked. I still appreciate like sort of knowing what's going on and how people are treating the topic.
Yeah. Okay. And so like from your reading sort of journey, when did you know you wanted to be an author, and when did you start writing?
I think I came to it pretty late, actually. I wrote some journals in middle school and high school that are like wonderfully embarrassing. I was just rereading them the other day and like crying, laughing because they're just so cringe. But I didn't like writing when I was growing up. I thought I was a math girl. I just really liked, getting 100% on tests and things like that. Like I was good at math and English and writing, like there wasn't just an easy answer. And then so I think I stayed away from that for a while. So I started college in math, and then I realized that I hated math actually because I was just good at it. But like once you got beyond a certain point, it was just like not for me. I like it in theory, I guess, but it's just too even weirder and wilder than English, and I just can't comprehend it. But so I like had this big life crisis sophomore year of college, which I kind of recommend getting a life crisis like that early in life, because then you can like figure out your life without waiting till you're 50. But I was sort of saved by rejoining. This is sort of a circuitous way to answer the question, but I rejoined like the environmental movement because I'd sort of remembered that I really cared about that when I was young. And I started, I joined a club. I became like co-president of this club. I started taking all these classes. I switched my major. And I eventually was like, oh, I actually want to write now. I feel like I have something to say. I have a different sort of take on writing now, in that I don't necessarily think you write when you have something to say, but that writing can be a way of thinking. But regardless, I was really enjoying it. And I was like, it's too late for me to major in English or writing or anything, but I'm going to work in climate change and I'm going to make writing a part of my life, whatever that looks like. So just mostly like nonfiction type stuff. I was, writing a blog called Eco Reflections, and which is also cringe, but doesn't exist anymore, thankfully. I started working in communications. And then, to get fully honest, I still wasn't really into writing fiction until my college boyfriend was killed in a hit and run accident. And this was a few months after we graduated. He was living in New York City. I was living in DC. And it really affected me and just made me want to leave a legacy. I just was like, oh my gosh, I could also disappear at any moment. Like, I need to leave something behind. And like, who wants to hear, the random ramblings of some 22-year-old? Like, I thought I could start writing stories about people who are more interesting than me. So I became obsessed with writing fiction. 10 years later, after working on it almost every day, I finally feel like my skill caught up with what I wanted to do. And so, yeah, now I'm here. And I will add, I think it's important to like know that I read journals around the time, that I first moved to DC, and the story about my boyfriend's death. I mean, I think that I would have turned to fiction eventually. There were like some glimmers of me like experimenting with that. I think that his death really catalyzed things and sped things up. But it feels really important to me to know that like it wasn't necessary for me to start writing fiction. Like I would have gotten there eventually, just kind of late. I still feel like I got to writing kind of late. Like, this book is going to be published when I'm 35, so I won't be on any like 5 under 35 lists, but take the game that
you made it. Yes.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying in terms of like you were on this path anyways, but it was just something that kind of sped you along there.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So we had somebody in the chat say, yes, the math problem where you think math is numbers before college and then all the numbers disappear.
Yeah.
I had a similar sort of, almost opposite where we started from. I was good at English and I loved reading. But I felt like, I don't know, I felt like that wasn't serious enough. And, first generation American, I felt like I needed to go into something that was like STEM. So I was like all about science and I was going to be a pharmacist. And so I did 4 years of pre-pharmacy. I got into pharmacy school and then I was like, I hate this. And I dropped out before I went like a day into pharmacy school. So, and then I went into communications as well. So our stories are pretty similar there.
Nice.
Sorry, you're going to say?
Oh, no, nothing.
So, okay, that tells us about kind of your writing journey. And then we had a few questions from the Bindery specifically about like how you write. Everybody's very curious about like your writing process. So, for instance, what is your go-to genre of music to listen to when you're writing, if you listen to anything?
I usually don't listen to music while I'm writing. I usually have my window open when it's nice, so I hear a lot of birds. But if there's a really aggressive sounding red-winged blackbird, maybe I'll close the window because I've gotten attacked by a red-winged blackbird once. But I guess I would only listen to music if I'm trying to drown something out. Like, I guess if I'm in a cafe or when I was living in DC, there'd be construction or my cat's like meowing too much. And then I'll listen to one of those YouTube playlists that are totally ridiculous, like evil classical music for when you're feeling like a villain. And, oldies are on in the other room, 3 doors down in a bad thunderstorm. And so just sort of like nice background music without words.
Yeah. So, that leads into another question that we got from the Bindery. So about you being an introverted versus an extroverted writer. So like, do you need alone time and hate distractions, or can you go to like, a coffee shop and write?
I can write anywhere. Usually, I prefer to write alone, like in my office. And that's more just because like that's where everything is set up. I like having 2 screens when I'm working on a big project, especially. So I can sort of look at notes or an outline or a previous draft on one screen and write on my big screen. I drink a lot of beverages and I like need to go to the bathroom a lot. So like when you're in a cafe, you have to, every time you go to the bathroom, it's like a journey. You're like, should I pack everything up? Like, what if somebody takes my seat? But I do also home. Yeah. But yeah, I enjoy writing in cafes from time to time, like when I'm out traveling, or I sometimes join these like shut up and write groups in Madison. Well, they'll meet at a bar or cafe, and that can actually be extremely useful because you're just sort of like have all these other people staring at you, and you're like, I must write for an hour and be so focused, and it's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the unmapping, well, first, can you tell us about the unmapping in your own words, right? They've heard it from me and they saw the publisher's weekly sort of deal announcement, but sort of in your words, can you tell us about the unmapping?
Yeah, I'll do my best. It's kind of complicated. It's definitely a chaotic and complicated story. But the short of it is the unmapping. When a city becomes unmapped, their buildings rearrange every day at 4 a.m. They just completely switch places. No one really knows why it's happening or the mechanics of it, and trying to figure that out is part of the story. So it takes place largely in New York, but it actually starts in this small town in Wisconsin, and then you learn a bunch of other cities get impacted by this as well. So it's not just a New York story, but mostly the characters are in New York. The two main characters are Esme and Arjun. They work at the emergency management department. They're kind of youngish in their early 20s. Arjun is in love with Esme, but Esme is engaged to a man named Marcus, and Marcus disappears on the first day of the unmapping. So we have all these different concerns trying to figure out what happened to Marcus, what's happening with the unmapping, and dealing with all the ramifications of what's happening. So there's just so much chaos to deal with. A lot of people aren't really thinking about fixing it or anything like that. We have big issues with the grid, with water, electricity, especially gas. We have the fact that, when 911 gets a call, they don't really know where to tell the ambulances and fire trucks and police vehicles where to go. You have a lot of people that get lost and don't know how to get home. Oh yeah, and there's also the aftermath of a hurricane, which gets downgraded to a tropical storm. So a lot going on. And in addition to those two characters, I dip into the perspectives of a bunch of side characters who are dealing with this in different ways. City mayor, a boy who gets trapped under a building, a journalist in Wisconsin, and things like that. So yeah, basically it's a disaster story. Someone asked me, is this a post-apocalyptic story? And I'm like, no, but it is a disaster story. In my head, it is an analogy for climate change, although it's not a perfect climate analogy, and becomes more about the thing itself. But that is definitely there. And there are also these questions about like rationality and faith, and when you're faced with something that just seems like completely impossible, how do you believe it, and how do you face the unknown? So I think a lot of the characters explore that too. I mean, Esme, similar to me, I guess, what loved math, loves rationality. But and then her coworker Arjun is sort of the opposite. Like he's sort of in his head dreaming all the time and just needs to understand reality a little bit more. So they kind of play off each other.
Someone asked, is there a reason for 4 a.m. and is it dependent on time zones? So they're staggered.
It is dependent on time zones. Yeah. Basically 4 a.m. is just that time that just feels so in between. Like it's not, if you're still awake at 4 a.m. from the previous day, you should not be awake anymore. And if you wake
Nothing
up
good happens at 4 a.m.
nothing good. And if you wake up at 4 a.m., if you don't need to for your job, it's like, no, why are you doing this? Like, so it just feels like that perfect in between time.
Yes, that is when I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh, this is too soon. Like 90% of the time, I'm gonna look at my phone and it's like 4 a.m. That's
Yeah.
like the hour that you're like, damn it, no,
Yeah. When I was rewriting this, I would wake up at 4 a.m. all the time. I'm just like, oh my gosh, stop it.
So, somebody mentioned before that they're excited that the climate change info and the mapping will be correct. Not to put any pressure on you, but in a similar way, how has your professional life? How did it influence the story? And you kind of said it's an analogy for climate change. So, take us a little bit through that influence, and then any other influences that you had for this book.
Yeah. I used to actually think that this story was the least connected to my work in climate change. I'm not working on climate disasters. I'm working with companies that are trying to pass policies and, thinking about solutions. And a lot of the other stories that I've written or I'm working on like to focus more on the solution side of things, not necessarily utopian, but I think it's really interesting to deal with people who are trying to make a difference in this way. But then, when I was writing this story, I wasn't really thinking about climate change, but it kind of butt its head in when I was thinking about, all of these disasters that are happening, or all the impacts of this disaster are not dissimilar, in fact, very similar. I don't think that there's a lot of climate science in this, so I'm not really thinking about getting it right or getting it wrong, but using this thing that happens to sort of meditate on how people deal with disaster and a known unknown. The thing is that this story is about how do I begin? How do I say this? It's about unpredictability. So it's about chaos. And, so much of climate change is going to make things unpredictable. It's not about temperatures getting slightly warmer. It's about disrupting weather systems in crazy ways. I don't think any climate fiction I'd read before talked about California flooding. It was always talking about California drying out and having intense droughts. And then last year, the atmospheric rivers and things like that, there was so much flooding and way too much water. They just didn't know what to do with all this water. There was landslides, people died. And so I think, there's a direct relationship between heat and chaos. And there's a scientific thing going on there too. When it comes to what's called entropy, the degree of disorder in a system is literally what entropy means. And you get entropy when you burn fossil fuels. So you burn gas, you burn oil, and some of it becomes productive electricity, but some of it goes into the atmosphere and becomes completely unusable, and it's no longer in a closed loop. It can't be turned from one thing to another. So the unmapping is sort of about this unpredictability, unpredictabilityness. There has to be some word there. But yeah, and then the other side of this is the thinking about resilient communities. That's going to become more and more of a thing. Is as time moves on, I do hope people continue drawing down fossil fuels and switching to clean energy, but there are going to be some unavoidable changes. And so there's a movement for creating climate resilient communities, helping churches get ready to offer power and water and food to their nearby communities. Related to that, actually, when I was rewriting this a couple weeks ago, it was a few days before the deadline, and a crazy thunderstorm came through our city. Tornadoes were in the forecast. We didn't get a tornado, but we got really intense winds that led to the worst power outage event that our city has faced, or at least that our electricity company has dealt with in their history, the most individual outage events, because there were hundreds of downed power lines and things like that. And it took days to fix it. And this happened, our power went out, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to finish this book. This novel. But other than that, obviously we were totally fine. And part of that was because I live near family now, and I was able to go to my mom's house, whose power went back up after 11 hours. Ours took 2 days, and finish my book there. And, I have that support structure, and not everybody has that. After we went to my mom's house, I got an email from the city. I signed up for all these city alerts, and the email says, we've just opened up some temporary shelters for power charging, food, water. And I was like, this is great, but you sent this email almost 24 hours after the power went out. My phone and computer would have been dead by now. I wouldn't have been able to see that. And I might not have even been signed up for that list. I feel like I'm weird in that I wanted to sign up for every single city alert that I could. So yeah, the funny thing is, though, a few days ago, after all of that, after that all got fixed, we had another storm. It wasn't that bad, but some people's power went out not ours like flickered. But then I got an email like 2 hours later announcing some temporary shelters. I was like, okay, so I feel like they've
The
already
response
worked.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's I'm in South Florida. I'm in Fort Lauderdale, and we just went through a bunch of like storms. I mean, I don't even know how many inches of rain it ended up being, but we got more than all of June's rain for the month, average rainfall in just like a day.
Wow.
So there was flooding here as well, like and it's been interesting because I've been looking for a place to like buy if I could. Well, first, the housing market here is absolutely garbage, but second, I'm like, why would I don't know that I want to buy something in Florida right now, because I mean, it's completely uninsurable at this point. Nobody's
Mhm.
offering insurance. Like all of the hurricane damage, there's a bunch of homes that have been ruined by hurricanes that nobody wants to buy. And so I've been reading a lot too about like people are like, what's the like safest place to live now? But like not even thinking about like things we used to think about, like, I don't know, crime. And now it's like, what has the less extreme weather like in
Yeah.
the United States, or you will be safe to live. So that's been interesting to see the shift as people are thinking about like, oh no, like where can I live to sort of like run away from the effects of climate change, you know?
And it's sort of, there are definitely places that are safer than others. Like Wisconsin is one of the most safe from impacts of global warming, but obviously, we're still getting these crazy storms that might get worse. And so, yeah, I think it's really everything is going to have to deal with it in some way or another.
Yeah. So somebody asked me why I chose this story, what made me choose this story. So, for me, I think that it was very much like something you talked about, like in terms of like this is a like disaster story, but also it's looking at like the aspects of the characters' lives. So it was like that combination of things. I think that before I went into manuscripts review, like I talked about what I wanted, and one was something that felt very genre blended, and this is like speculative literary fiction to me, so it had that genre blend. I love that it focused in on the characters, but it didn't like sort of look away from the larger set piece of like this geographical natural disaster, right? Like we're
Mhm.
still trying to figure out what's happening, but it's still very much like, where's my fiance, and I want to be a hero, and like, just so many other like day-to-day things happening in the story. So, and then I really enjoyed the writing style as well. I kept calling it very chatty, and people were like, what does that mean in my in my Discord? I'm like, it feels like somebody is talking to you, right? It has that flow of like just very like smooth, like through the writing or whatnot. So those were the things that stood out to me, more than anything else.
Nice. I realized I forgot to answer the second part of your earlier question about
Yeah.
other media influences.
Yes, yeah.
But that reminds me of it because the voice was something that I worked hard on in rewriting this for the second time. I'll probably talk about I rewrote this like 3 different times. But when I was thinking about doing the rewrite a few years ago, I was really thinking about what voice it should be in, and the book Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor um, was just absolutely amazing. It's this brutal, gorgeous novel. The voice is breathless. There are these huge, long sentences and paragraphs that just push you forward and forward. And I was so taken by that. So I took that and I was like, okay, I'm going to try to rewrite the first chapter in a voice like in that book. And I'm also going to try to rewrite it in this other kind of more stoic voice. And I'm also going to try to rewrite it in this voice. And I definitely like that was just really useful in finding out what the voice of the actual book would be, of just sort of figuring out how to blend the feelings that I wanted from those different voices. Um, so yeah, that, and also I think maybe that's why I added there being a hurricane. I don't even know if there was going to be a hurricane in the first place. Anyways, but yeah, I think that's something I love writing about this book, and I hope that people like it too. Is just like each character has their own voice, and so maybe that helps explain the chattiness. Like you're in their head, and you're you get their thoughts, and that's because that's really what I like to read the most. I think is when you get to experience someone else's thoughts and just feel like you're living in the world in their head. And I like to do that in my writing, and having two different, like five different heads to jump between. So you're not necessarily going to like read my thoughts or like feel, you know, my brain, but I think there are facets of it in these other characters that I've channeled.
Yeah.
It's kind of like acting in a way. I kind of
Yeah.
feel like practicing and then performing. When you're writing, you're like performing.
I this is really interesting to me. Get a huge culture shock when the topic of US weather disasters comes up in the Discord. Like really put Scotland's rainy windstorms in context. This is funny to me because the first time that I ever went to Europe, I was in Paris and I was meeting a bunch of my friends, my best friends. She went to school there. She went to graduate school there. So we were meeting a bunch of her classmates and I was like, you know, asking questions about the city and I go, well, what kind of like weather disaster do you guys get? And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, like in Florida, we get hurricanes and like in the Midwest, they get tornadoes and California gets earthquakes. Like, what do you guys get? And they're like, nothing.
Yeah.
Like, nothing at all. So I think it's like interesting. I don't know, especially being in the US that we're almost so used to these things that, you know, is not quite the case everywhere else.
Yeah. Well, Europe gets heat waves and they have no air conditioning. And
That is
then
true. That is true. So we've been talking a little bit about your inspirations for the unmapping, but what was it like writing it? When did you start writing the story? How long did it take you to write it? Like, how did that all happen?
yeah, so this story definitely has been through a long journey itself. It started about 5 years ago. I wanted to write a story about getting lost where you live. So that was sort of the beginning of it. I was like, I would take the train up to work and then walk home every day for about an hour long walk, and just sort of sometimes realize how little I was paying attention to my surroundings. They just become automated. Um, I was also really inspired by the book City in the City by China Mieville, which is about, you know, these two different, completely different nations that live in the same city, but are taught to just not see each other. They physically cannot see each other. So, you know, choosing not to see where you live. And that was sort of the starting point. And it's like, I think this idea of getting lost is really nice also just for a character perspective of like getting outside of yourself, getting, you know, pushed outside of yourself to be able to see yourself a little bit better, if that makes sense. So that basically that premise is pretty much the only similarity between that first version and this one. I wrote a first draft. It wasn't that great. It was my first like real novel I attempted. I think I tried writing one novel before, but I was glad that I finished it. I shared it with a couple people, basically got confirmation like, no, it's not quite ready. One writing friend of mine was very nice and just sort of pointed out some nice issues with it. Somebody else, I asked if he was willing to send it to his agent, and he was just like, no, it's not ready. I was like, honestly, like I needed that. Like I really appreciate that now. It's like I put it aside for a while and I worked on a bunch of other things, but I was like, okay, that's not ready, but I'm going to keep working on my craft. I'm going to keep studying fiction, going to get short stories published, writing every single day, feeling a lot more confident as a writer. I did this thing called Story a Day May, where I tried to write a story every single day of the month of May. And so I feel like I really pushed myself to get better. And then was thinking about that novel that I had written. And one day just was like, I really want to fix this. Like, I think I know how I can fix it. And that's by putting these main characters in the emergency management department, like having this hurricane, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, very, very useful information, blah, blah, blah. So I spent some time like plotting it out and then took 1 month to rewrite it. I was like, I was only working part-time. So I had a lot of time in the morning to really focus on it and push myself to rewrite it. And I did. And I was feeling great about that. Got some more people to read, you know, took some more time editing it. More than a month to edit it than it took to write it. But then that was the version that I, you know, shared with my agent, Annie Romano, who's been amazing, sending it out, getting a bunch of, you know, feedback from editors like, oh, I like this, but not that. And after a couple of years of that, I was just kind of like, you know, maybe I do want to rethink this again. You know, I've continued to been writing a lot in that time. So between when she first sent it out, and when you accepted it, I'd actually like written 2 draft books in that time. Like I've really feel like I've grown in that time. And so I was like, I actually kind of told her, maybe we can put this on ice for a little bit. Like I want to rethink some things. And she was just like, no, it's great. Like we're gonna keep, like I think it's, she really believed in it. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So then you accepted it, which is amazing. And I was just like, I really want to take another look at this first. I really want to rethink some things. And thankfully, you are all super patient and let me do that. So I thought that I could do it in a month because I had rewritten it. I'd overhauled it before in a month. So I was like, I can do this again. And it took me a little bit closer to like 6 weeks, and it was really, really hard. I will say it was a big challenge. I don't necessarily recommend anyone else do that, but I'm really glad that I did.
Yeah. I want to come back to the redrafting, but we had a question from my Bindery about like when you submitted or when she submitted to Bindery, like did you guys know what it was? Like were you intrigued by the model, or was it just like, well, here's another publisher, like maybe it will work there?
I did not know that she was like,
she was just like spreading it around.
Yeah, I was just like, do your thing,
Yeah.
that's fine. I was, thinking about other stuff. Like she probably wrote about it in an email at some point, but I was just like, I don't know.
You're like, that's none of my business.
Yeah, it's all you. So yeah, I when I heard that you were making an offer, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to learn about the bindery, and I was really, really, really intrigued by it. So far, obviously, it's been amazing. I mean, I just love that. I feel like I feel very welcomed. I feel like I'm very in the loop on everything that's happening, and in terms of all the different pieces, the editing, the promotion, the cover. I'm also really happy that I, get to live in the social media world a bit more without needing to get a TikTok. Like that's a big plus. Like the more I read about the future of publishing and how social media matters so much, I'm just like so grateful to be working with you guys, because I'm like, I don't want to do social media myself. So
yeah, I will say when as I was reading through pitch letters and I had things that were on my short list, right, I would go and just like search the author and just be like, let me see what's out there, let me check their Twitter account and make sure there's like nothing there that's gonna, and I couldn't find you anywhere, and I was like, this is actually like ideal. This is like the ideal pairing. It's like an author who's like pretty much not on social media, and like you don't have to worry about the TikTok because I got it kind of thing. So that was really interesting that like when I was like, oh, she's not really on social media, I was like, yeah, this is exactly what this model was kind of made for.
Yeah.
Cover, you say? I already told my bindery we've had one meeting that was just kind of like about general art direction, and I shared some of that with them as well. But we do have an upcoming meeting this week, so I don't know what else I can say there, but we do have a meeting too, and that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Yes, there will be a cover reveal. Obviously, the members in my bindery will get it first, but then it will be revealed to everybody as well. And so far, like the process has been like Denise said, like very collaborative. It was great. We got to sit in on like a meeting with Bindery's creative director, and she came with like ideas of like, here's like what I saw, and through reading the book herself, but also through some feedback that she had gathered from me and Denise. So that was really, really fun. It's been like one of the like highlights so far. Obviously, there's just like so much more to still keep going through, but being able to sit in that meeting and give feedback and like, I don't know, see it all start to come together, that was pretty exciting. I love when authors aren't so active on social media. And so I'm trying to find info on sequels.
Well, I don't know. I was thinking about sequels actually, because I was two of my favorite books that I've read recently, The Morning Star by Karl Ove Knausgaard and The Idiot by Elif Batuman.
Mhm.
They both have sequels, and I'm, I don't know how to. I'm excited to read them. I never would have thought like a book that felt more literary, I guess, that had beginning, middle, and end could have a sequel. The Ove Nausgaard one was always intended to be in the trilogy, but the idiot one is surprising to me. So I'll look forward to that. But I was thinking like, I wonder what the sequel to the Unmapping would look like.
You're gonna come back inspired from reading those sequels. Like, I have a book too.
Yeah.
So who are some of your author inspirations?
Sorry, my cat needs to come into this office.
Yes.
Come here. Oh, come on. Nope, he just wants to run away. Okay, well, that's probably going to happen. That's probably going to happen again.
My dog was sitting here because he was hearing the cat and he was looking at me like, what's going on?
Yeah, crazy. Hey, I see you. Okay, my favorite author inspirations. Definitely Ted Chiang is wonderful. Kim Stanley Robinson is a big, big inspiration of mine in terms of how he handles stories of science in such an ecstatic way, like being so excited about the science itself. I don't think I could ever write a story like he writes. Like he just, does so much research and really delves into that kind of thing. But I love his world building. The Ministry for the Future is actually not my favorite novel of his, but I also really appreciate the way that he tackles the climate crisis as a present day thing, whereas so much like science fiction takes place very far in the future or in an alternate reality. But that book really is about politics of the here and now, and I appreciate that. Karen Russell and Kelly Link are both big inspirations also, because they really inspired me to push the boundaries of what writing is, I think, and not, limit myself to a certain box of, oh, I can write a science fiction or a literary story. Like they really focus on a genre that some call slipstream, and diving into different genres while still focusing on, characters that feel very real, and I don't know, just like these hints of magic and science and weirdness. And so those are some big ones for me.
You sent the chat into a tailspin of like sequels that they're waiting for. So I still have a few more questions, but someone said I'm looking for a book club kit. You should add one at the end of your book. I've been thinking about this too. I don't know if we could add it at the end of the book, but I think that like between you and I, we could probably come up with something that like we could put for the bindery. I don't know, discussion types of questions or whatever that would be really fun. The other thing also is there are portions that in the like version that I read that probably won't be in the like final copy of the book. So I'm thinking specifically about one of the characters, like his tweets or like the short story that he wrote cat reveal. Is that lasagna or is that Monday?
Yeah, it's lazy.
Lazy.
He just likes to stand on top of me sometimes, so
Yeah,
that'll calm him down.
very cat behavior.
All right, very normal cat. All right. Okay, get off.
He's like, no, I'm here now, and I am the star of the show.
And your whole butt is the star of the show. Okay. Oh, the trick is getting him off without him scratching me. Oh my gosh, he's really stuck on me.
Hi, lazy.
All right, I'm free.
I don't remember what I was saying. Oh, the like short stories and stuff that I would love to share with the Discord as well.
Yeah.
So, like bonus content.
Yeah, there were a lot of little vignettes that got cut that made it, didn't make it on the final edit. So I was thinking about sharing those at some point.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Okay. Outside of books, do you enjoy any other media like TV, film, or are there specific things outside of like media that you do to like refill your creative well?
Outside of books, I usually read. But but I pretty rarely watch TV or movies, but I am excited for the House of the Dragon premiere tomorrow.
Okay.
I'm a big Game of Thrones fan, and I thought the first season of House of the Dragon was really great. Big Lord of the Rings fan. I had a deal going with my husband that I could only make him rewatch the trilogy again after getting a book deal. So
Yes.
I was like, yes. When I saw the email or had some phone call or something, I walked into the room playing the Lord of the Rings music, and I was just like, get
It's
ready.
time. Get ready. That's amazing. I love that. Okay. What parts of the publishing process still to come are you most looking forward to? Because there's still a lot more to go.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to working with the developmental editor. I think that yeah, that's another thing that differentiates the Bindery from other publishers in working with an editor, in addition to you as the acquirer. So I think it's really cool how that is laid out. But anyways, I've met her already. She's great. She's reading it right now. I've told her to not hold back, to really help hone this, and so I'm just ready for one last time to throw myself in and make it as good as it can be. Also, super looking forward to the cover conversation
Yeah.
on Tuesday. But
Yeah. It feels like, I don't know, probably for you, right? We're approaching this from two different perspectives, but it feels like, so long that, until we get the book next year, but also things keep moving very quickly at the same time. So I keep going back and forth between the two things. Where I'm like, I just want the book already, but then they'll send an email about some other update, and I'm like, oh my God, this is going so fast.
yeah,
All right. What do you hope readers walk away with after they read The Unmapping?
I really hope that it's fun. I hope people just have enjoyed reading it. I hope they have a good time. And this is another hard one because I feel like I just hope people will resonate with something. I don't care what. I guess like I have a lot of different characters and who have different perspectives and philosophical approaches to the unmapping and what's happening, and they don't always agree with each other. But um, so I hope that one of them will say or think something that the reader identifies with and feels some sort of recognition. I feel like yeah, as I've mentioned, I think the ultimate goal of the novel as a form is getting people to live in somebody else's head for a while, and so come away thinking a little bit differently about things. Yeah, I love. I mean, so they're the two main characters. There's Esme and there's Arjun, and Arjun is kind of a lot more fun and lighthearted, and Esme is very serious, but and there's also a lot of side characters to lose yourself in. I think some of the very first side character that's just like Coffee Man was one of the most fun to write. And I don't know, I just hope that there's at least one moment where somebody reads something and recognizes something and remembers it.
Do you have a favorite character of the ones that you've written?
Um, oh gosh, I mean, I really love all of my characters, which I don't know how that sounds, but like I feel like they're my children. I care about them. But and I think that's sort of necessary to write realistic characters. Like you have to like understand them and know who they are and what they're coming from and where they're going. Or not necessarily where they're going, but what path they're on. But yeah, I think I really like them all. It's hard, but if it comes to the main two characters, Esme and Arjun, I think I really enjoyed writing Arjun a little bit more than Esme because, as I said, I just sort of like had more fun with him, and Esme is going through a lot. I mean, so she's very serious, and it's kind of draining.
um, are there any specific book covers or styles that you were looking to as inspiration for the cover of The Unmapping? That's
a funny question because when I first of all, when I was told that I could give some ideas on the cover, I was just blown away. I was just like, what? You're allowing me to like have an opinion on that? That's crazy. And I spent so much time looking at book covers. Like when I was, taking a break from writing, I'd be like, oh, I can still feel productive. I'll look at book covers. And I saw so many book covers that I liked. I really liked all these ideas. And then when we had the meeting and the art director showed us this style of illustration from this illustrator, I was like, oh my gosh, all of my ideas are incorrect. Like this is the exact feeling and style that feels right. So yes, I had some inspirations and then threw them all away when we saw the illustrator that we will hopefully be working with.
Yeah. I think it's super interesting too that like that, it feels like the direction that what we're heading feels really different to anything else, which is great. It's not like they're like, well, copy paste to something else that has been super successful. They're just like letting the book be its own thing. So I'm really excited about like how that will turn out.
Yeah.
What are your favorites just sort of generally? I think that what was the first thing that you said? No people on the cover and no something about the spines, like no stripes on the spine or something along those lines.
Solid color spine, like solid color with writing so that people can put it on their colorful bookshelves. Color-coded bookshelves. I really have been attracted to the style of book cover that is just simple, like good color with like one very interesting little image. The book's field work was something I was thinking about a lot because I also really like those colors. I think it's a novel. I haven't read it, but it's like this green and it has a cartoon mushroom. Ileana Reagan. It's a memoir. And I liked that color green for a while. And I actually showed that to my mom when we were out like shopping one day. And she was just like, ooh, that shirt's in the color of your future cover. And I was just like, I don't know.
Maybe. Another question for you. How has your perspective on editing changed since the book deal's been finalized? And that's from Vega.
Hey, Vega.
Hi, Denise.
Perspective on editing. I don't know if it has changed. I think that I was super ready to get into the edit before the book deal. And I was really excited to see that the contract said, I will deliver a book of speculative fiction about 100,000 words. And that's what it said. I was like, I could send any book.
Yes. An old switcheroo there.
So I think that it was very much a very dreamlike process of rewriting. It was really more rewriting and revising than editing. I think of editing as more like, editing sentences and editing grammar and punctuation. But it was definitely the most intense revision process that I've ever gone through because this rewrite was so very intense. And basically, I had to take a look at this book that I'd written that, I thought was good, that you liked it and accepted it. But something, was just not quite right about how it all came together to me 3 years later. And I spent 2 weeks before I started rewriting, just thinking about it, just, writing things out about like, what is the unmapping? Like, what does this mean for the characters? What does it mean for the world? And how do I make sense of that? And how do all the things that happen stem from the core idea of what it is in comparison to things just happening because they need to happen. So it was really fun actually to feel like I could just take this concept, which I always felt was a strong concept, and sort of reapproach it and drape myself onto it. Basically, I read once that I think a novel is just a good structure that you just put your entire life into. And I was like, I'm gonna throw everything in my life into the structure, into the rewriting. So yeah, then I went into some specific, like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this through line or that through line. Like, how can I make them again fix them so that they fit into this bigger idea of having a stronger idea of what this book means to me. And I think it kind of makes sense that, like, this is a complicated premise, and it took me like 5 years to understand what was happening here, and then to be like, okay, I have a good sense of the core of it, and I'll rework it from the ground up, essentially.
Yeah. And you're looking at it through so many different perspectives also. So it's like a very complicated premise, and like understanding all of the ripple effects of like what this would do, and then also introducing all of these different people and how they would view it and go through it. So
Mm-hmm.
all right, those
Yeah.
are all of the questions that I had ready for you. Anything else that you want to share? Anything else you didn't get to touch on that you're like, I really wanted to say this? Or any questions for me?
Well, yeah, sure. What are you reading lately? What do you look for in the book, and what was it? Maybe if you don't mind, about the unmapping. You already sort of mentioned it, but is there something that you identified in the unmapping as specifically what you were looking for, or
Yeah.
was it? Yeah.
So I think going through the manuscript process was really interesting because they're like at that stage, right? I had been primarily like a book reviewer, and I've done some editing and some like sensitivity reading and stuff. But being like at the acquisition stage, you almost have to have like a little bit of like imagination of like what could this book be through a few more series of edits, right? Like how could it come out on the other side? And so I think that I was looking for something that, like you said, had those good bones, and that I really wanted something that had a writing style that I was like, oh, you can tell like this writing style is like it's there, right? And I think that that's primarily what called out to me about the unmapping. And I will say too, like at the end, right, there were a few that I'm like, how about this one? How about this one? And like pretty strongly in my bindery, people were like, I was calling it geographical natural disaster because they get anonymized for
Mhm.
like I don't attach the name or the author. So everybody was like geographical natural disaster. So there was a lot that like just the hearing the pitch and like the premise called out to people. And I think the thing that somebody said in my bindery that finally made the decision to for me was like between you and somebody else I was considering was like I could look at my TBR and there are 3 other books like book A, but there's no other book on my TBR like the unmapping and like the premise of the unmapping. And I was like, huh. Yeah, like that was like, yeah, you're right. Like this is kind of, it felt pretty unique. It felt pretty fresh. I enjoyed the writing style. So yes, I fought really hard for it, Amy said. So there are a lot of people who are like, pick that one. So yeah, I think that those were pretty much the elements that, and then, obviously you come in and you're like, I really enjoyed it. I was thinking maybe we could like do this, do this, do this. And the fact that you're like, yes, I've been thinking about like how I can make the book better and I want to do another draft. I was like, that's so amazing, right? That you have somebody that's like willing to iterate through the process. And like, you already had all of these ideas for like how to redraft before the dev edit. So that was interesting as well.
Nice.
Uh, it was not that many books. Okay. I'm not that indecisive. Yeah, and as for what I'm reading now, I actually just finished reading Witch King earlier today. I'm reading all of the novels that are Hugo nominated for this year. There's like a 50-50 chance I'll be at Worldcon this year. I still don't actually know, which is hilarious because it's like in 2 months. So I've been reading that, and so I finished Witch King, and then I'm halfway through Chinging All Stars right now. So I want to finish that one today. After we're done here, that's what I'm going to go hop into.
I'm gonna try to garden. I'm learning how to garden, and
Yeah.
it is very much a learning process. I just realized that you can't compost just by throwing a bunch of food into a tub. You have to do a lot of other stuff too.
Had you asked me what composting is, I would tell you is throwing a bunch of stuff in a tub. So, um, oh, It's such a great premise. I would have bought the other one to support Mari, but I would buy this one all on my own. Denise, what are you currently reading?
I mentioned briefly that I am reading Strong Motion by Jonathan Franzen.
Yes, I remember.
At this point, I'm not really like enjoying it that much, but I want to finish it. I'm like determined to be a completist on Franzen novels.
Yeah.
I have a big TBR list as well on my Kindle. The sequel to The Morning Star by Karl Ove Knausgaard, although it's more of a book that takes place in the same universe, but not the same characters. But I think the third book will tie them all together. Gosh, I usually am reading like 5 books at a time, but I actually just finished a couple. So I think that's it for now.
Yeah, you threw everybody into a tizzy now about composting, stuff in tubs plus worms.
Yes, I'm really excited about finding some worms. Every time I find a worm when I'm digging for some plants, I call them my princesses, and I put them on top of a stump and I let them hang out there for a while, and then put them in the compost. But also, this is not a compost Q&A, but I'm pretty sure my missing ingredient was a lot of like brown stuff, like leaves. So I just added a lot of leaves, and hopefully that'll fix it. But
even it out. Tune in next time for our compost Q&A after you've learned a few more lessons.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think that brings us to the end of it. I know that, like I said, there will be much more announcements coming out, and I will. Denise and I will be in touch throughout this process, and we can talk about like what makes sense, for the cover reveal and all of that information as it comes. But I really wanted everybody to have a chance just to meet you and to hear from your perspective about this book, and hopefully they're as excited as we are about this book.
Nice. It's really nice meeting everyone.
One more sneak. Is there anyone Denise would want to blurb the Unmapping?
Yes, everybody. I don't know. I really admire Kim Stanley Robinson, as I mentioned, and I feel like if he lived this, I would be over the moon. Just the authors I admire, I suppose. Matt Bell is another one who really likes to tackle climate change in his fiction that I'm thinking about. And he's just so some authors you just know are just so giving. Like, I feel like he lifts up other authors and, talks about them a lot. So those are 2 that I've thought about reaching out to, fangirling at some point.
Really? Hey. The Unmapping and Worms, a great chat. Plus we had a cat cameo too. So what more could you ask for?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you everybody for being here, and we will catch you guys soon. Bye.